So, welcome. I'm Wendy De Rosa, and this is my book, Becoming an Empowered Empath. It's actually my fourth book, and my third book, I was giving a book talk right there in Boulder Bookstore um, about, let's see, my daughter's now six, so it was 6 years ago. Just after she was born, I had released my book and was giving my talk there in Boulder Bookstore. And I have been a Boulder resident. I was a Boulder resident for 26 years, minus 8 years of a little jaunt of traveling to California, living in California and Austin, Texas. But this has been my local bookstore for the majority of my adult life. And so I'm really honored to be here and offering this talk and information about being an empowered empath, but also honoring the local bookstores like Boulder Bookstore. So first I want to say that what is an empath? An empath is someone who feels the energy through their sentient experience. They feel the emotional energy of others, they feel the energy in their space around them. And what often gets equated with being an empath is actually not um, the feeling of feeling the energy, it's the feeling of being overwhelmed by energy. And empaths will often live with this experience of I um, I feel the energy of other people and I take on the energy of other people, and then I end up feeling, overwhelmed, congested, depleted, fatigued. I get headaches. I have a difficulty figuring out my energy versus someone else's energy. I'm having a conversation with someone, there's a connection. They walk away feeling wonderful. I walk away feeling, like I took on all of their energy. These are some experiences that people will describe um, to me certainly, and we'll talk about in terms of being an empath. And what I would love to support you with in this time together is just understanding the power that lives in your body as an empath if you relate to this. And I want to be clear that not everybody identifies as an empath, but a lot of us in this day and age are having empathic experiences. So I'm going to talk about that also in a minute. So an empath is someone who feels the energy in around us and around with other people. Sometimes it's emotional energy, and sometimes it really is the vibe or whatever might be in the collective that we're feeling. And the experience again is that that energy crosses into our field, and then we end up absorbing it, internalizing it, and sometimes having difficulty separating it from it. And why is that happening? Why are empaths having this experience of energetic overwhelm and living with that sense of maybe debilitation, although that might feel extreme for some people and right on point for other people? So I want to explain something in the energetic system. Then this is what I talk about in the book more in depth. And this is what it is that so much of our inner experience and the outer experience has to do with the power centers in the center of your body. So your chakras ultimately, and the central channel of your body and your grounding cord. So what happens here is that empaths, human beings, we carry in the center of our body, and particularly in the lower chakras of our energy body, we carry a significant amount of power that relates to our humanity. And we also carry a significant amount of wounding that when it goes untouched, unprocessed, unrecognized. We're not necessarily tuning into the lower body, the lower chakra system. We end up in a situation where that particular energy is, another way of saying it is, it becomes out of control. It becomes energy we might not necessarily be embodying. We might not necessarily be controlling it. We might not necessarily be in touch with it. And it becomes an area of the body where energy starts to absorb into our system. So, what happens for the empath is that the empathic experience um, has been in this profile, essentially, that there has been, for whatever reason, and some of it is just it's just the lack of training in our education system, that we even have this lower body. It's not like we learn about the energetic anatomy in school. It's not, it's sometimes it's just that we weren't taught. No one's teaching us to ground into the root chakra and second chakra and third, unless you're seeking that information out. Ultimately, many of us, many of us people, empaths, will live in the upper chakras and will live with an out of control experience in the lower chakras, creating a lot of transference between the world and our own bodies, our own energy bodies. So, one of the reasons I wrote this book is because, in my own experience, I didn't identify personally as an empath for till maybe like 5 years ago or so, maybe a little longer, maybe 6, not too much longer. Not that long ago, and I've been an intuitive healer for 26 years, and I grew up in a family of 8 children, big Italian family. Lots of yelling and screaming, lots of stealing food off your plates, lots of survival things. I went to work very young at 12 years old and helped the family throughout my teenage years, paying bills and etc. And um, I I had developed oversensitivity symptoms. I could feel everything. I had a lot of anxiety. I developed depression. I gained a bunch of weight as a child. And this progressed throughout a lot of my years into my teenage years, and I became um, very anxious, and then progressed into a nervous breakdown in my freshman or sophomore year in college. And part of it was because I didn't have much of a childhood. I worked and worked and worked. But the other part of it was I was unbelievably congested with how much I was um, taking responsibility for energetically at such a young age. But what started to shift for me is that I, I, s- I, m- to make a very long story short, I met my healing teacher and learned that I had a gift, that the experience I was having as a child was that I had heightened intuition, and that if I turn to it and understand the full spectrum of my intuitive abilities and my gifts, then I could help people and I wouldn't be disabled by the overwhelm and the oversensitivity. And so I progressed as a healer. This is a very abridged version because I didn't jump into it that quickly or easily. But I became a healer. I I had no interest in being a healer, to be honest with you. I wanted to be a musician. I was a singer-songwriter. I used to play music at Penny Lane coffee shop on in Boulder, right on Boulder when it existed, and there used to be a Mercury Cafe there, Cafe Mars, excuse me, there. Mercury Cafe is in Denver. I used to play music in Boulder and all over Denver and um, California, and that was where my heart was at the time. I didn't have much of a childhood, so this was like my me creating my childhood. I wanted to be a rock star. That was my that's what I was pursuing. So, but I had this gift and I would give sessions as needed, when I had friends who needed them. And long story short, I had a big referral practice. By the time I was 30, I had 500 clients from word of mouth, and Facebook didn't exist back then. So it was just this calling that I was stepping into. And it progressed, and I started teaching work, and I formed the School of Intuitive Studies, and I've been training healers ever since. So why am I telling you this? There's more to the story, but it's somewhat interesting. And the reason I'm saying this is because I didn't come into understanding empaths or the nature of empathic healing or the empath's experience until there was such an expansive experience of collective trauma that was occurring in the world. I mean, everything from politics to race to climate to um, you know gender to sexuality to everything that was surfacing on the planet, when ultimately the shadow started to emerge of everything that's already been there. And people are having experiences of absolute overwhelm, and it's twofold. It's that the collective has emerged its trauma field, and it's that that trauma field is touching our personal traumas. And what that points to is the lower chakras. From the waist down is where we carry a significant amount of our personal wounds and traumas that we are here to heal in this life. And so the empathic experience, once I started to really explore through practicing working with clients and students what their experiences it was and what my experience was with it, I started to develop this understanding framework that the empath, their power, our power in being sensitive and in tuned, is not a curse. The power comes from how well am I able to drop into my lower body and be vulnerable, to be real with my feelings and how I feel, to be willing to process my history and what I'm holding that's still it's held as energy in the lower body. And as I drop into my grounding inside myself, my legs, my feet, what ends up happening when we become grounded is we get connected to the vital force of earth that moves through the grounding cord and sources those lower power centers. And empathic protection comes from radiance. It comes from our ability to be in the central channel of our body and sourced in the central channel, and to be radiant from the center of our being outward to our the external, to our auric field outside ourselves. The auric field, they say, is 10 and a half fingers length in circumference around our whole body. So maybe about 12 to 18 inches, depending on how big your fingers are. Mine are not very big. So about 12 to 18 inches in circumference. That's our auric field. And can we just put light around us and walk through life protected? Absolutely. You absolutely can put a bubble of light around you as a tool to support protection for your energy body. But it's a wonderful band aid. It's a wonderful temporary in the moment maintenance tool to use. It doesn't replace the need for the inner essence of you to emerge. And that might mean your intuitive ability. That might mean your creative self. That might mean the ability to be okay with your emotions and giving yourself time and permission to feel them. When we feel our feelings, we drop into our body. When we grieve, we come home. When we express our anger therapeutically, not necessarily in reaction, but when we allow ourselves to have our anger, it's empowering. It puts us in right alignment in ourselves. It corrects a bent pillar. If we've been bent or out of alignment in any way, when we get in touch with the depth of our truth in the center of our body and in our lower body, we embody. And that power of grounding and embodying inside ourselves creates that radiance from the center of our being. What I'm giving you around being an empowered empath in yourself is a snippet of the the teachings that are in this book and the experience in the book. Part of what's important for empaths have learned how to navigate the unspoken. They've learned, we've been raised in trying to make sense of our experience, and much of it's unspoken. And so part of what I'm teaching here in at the process is that you are you're reading information, and then you go into a deeper healing experience, a deeper meditative experience. So we go from consciousness, cognitive, deep into subconscious, because it's important that sensitive people that we are doing our inner healing work, and we're also making sense of what was confusing for us through the empathic and sentient experience growing up. So, in many ways, there's sort of a reparenting that's happening in our younger consciousness, in our body, in our lower body. Um, Again, so much more of that is also in my book, Becoming an Empowered Empath.